Hello and welcome to Calm the Pharm podcast, where pharmacy business meets legal wisdom, minus the headache. In each episode, we share practical legal tips and real-life examples to help you run your pharmacy with confidence. I'm your host, Sarah Stoddart. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome back to another episode of Calm the Pharm podcast. Today we're continuing on our exploration of the general requirements of the pharmacy location rules. Today we're going to look at the requirement that the applicant has at all relevant times a legal right to occupy the proposed premises, whether that right is to occupy the premises on the day the application is made or after that day. This one is one that can cause a few headaches. So as you will have heard from my reading of the requirement, the at all relevant times phrase pops up again. So you'll recall from last week that at all relevant times means the day on which the application is made, so the day it's lodged, and the day it is considered by the authority. So the applicant must, on those days, the day it's lodged and the day it's considered, have a legal right to occupy the proposed premises. Now, what does a legal right to occupy the proposed premises mean? Well, it means a legal and binding right to occupy the premises. So it's usually in the form of a lease. So there's a few ways this can go. If the applicant owns the premises, then obviously that's great. That makes it nice and easy to show that they have a legal right to be there. However, if they own it in another entity or a trust, you need to show the flow down from that entity and trust down to the actual applicant. So you might need a lease or a license or right to occupy document put in place. So if you own, that's how you deal with that. If you are a tenant, which is most common, you need to show your lease. So it is important that your lease is negotiated prior to your application being lodged, because at all relevant times includes that date. Now, it is also necessary for the lease in relation to the premises to be signed. So you need to have that legal right, so the signed legal right when you lodge. It's not going to get you over the line to lodge a unsigned lease. So you need to make sure it's signed. That is even the case if the commencement date of the lease is in the future. So you might be lodging the application today, but you're not going to take over occupation of the premises for another 2 months. That's fine. The commencement date can be in the future. It just needs to be a legal right that exists at all relevant times. So that means a signed lease for the most part. Also important is to look at your lease to see whether it contains any special conditions which might give the landlord or another party a right or something to suggest that there isn't actually a legal right for you to occupy. So some examples of this is if it's subject to an existing tenant vacating the premises, or if it's subject to the landlord board approval, those sort of things. Anything that might pop up which actually will stand in your way of being able to occupy the premises. It is okay, though, if you have a special condition in there relating to PBS approval, so the lease being subject to approval. That is okay. That exists in many lease documents. Now, if your premises is a new premises and maybe your lease isn't ready, a lot of people say to me, can we submit on an offer document? This is a tricky question because it really comes down to whether or not the offer is binding. So if it is an offer to lease that is expressed to be not binding, then chances are it can't be used to demonstrate a legal right. However, if it is an offer or a heads of agreement that is binding, it is signed, it states that it is binding, you can see that it is signed, and there is sufficient detail in the offer for it to actually form an agreement between the parties and there's nothing else left to be agreed, then possibly it can get you over the line. This requirement really does need careful detail and attention to make sure that the document you're submitting is appropriate. Also important across your whole application process, but particularly in your lease documents, is making sure that the documents you're submitting to evidence legal right to occupy actually, firstly, have the address of the proposed premises in them or on them. So the address needs to be there. A lot in plan usually is not helpful to the department and they will ask for more information. Or if the address isn't in the document, but there is the lot and plan, you'll need need evidence to join the lot and plan to an address, which can be done through various means. So ensuring your address is in the document, and as well as that, ensuring that the address that is on the document provided as supporting evidence is actually the same as the address that you want the proposed premises to be at. So the address that you use for your application must be consistent across all documents. That sounds really easy, but is often catches people. So sometimes one document might say shop one, another says tenancy one, it might say O1. There's lots of variations. The other thing we see a lot is where a premises is located on a corner block. They might use Smith Street, they might use John Street, they might use corner of Smith and John Street. So it is just important to work with your landlord to determine what address will you actually be using, and ensure that is consistent across all documents. You really don't want your application being held up because of that. So once you've got your legal right to occupy documents together, obviously that forms part of your submissions. It is possible that you'd need to demonstrate that the applicant or the proposed tenant on the document is actually a registered pharmacist. And of course, there are various ways to do that. But the key document here is actually that document which shows your right to be there from a particular date, that is signed, sealed and delivered in writing, and that there's no outs that might stand in your way. Hope that's been helpful for today. I look forward to speaking to you next week.